All marriages are like this. Nothing can be done about it anyways. And there's enough good things about it, so I better just stay in a difficult marriage than to be alone. How many times have you said this? I know I've said it numerous times, and I'm speaking from experience, and I'll tell you my story in just a little bit. But today, we're going to be talking about how self-justification and how your brain is biased to your confirmation bias, to your story, to what is your reality, and it causes a lot of friction in your relationships. Last week, I talked all about this and just a lot about the science of self-justification and what is happening in the brain. And today, we're going to talk about it specifically in relationships. So if you're married or in a relationship, we're going to talk about why you can't see your blind spots and why this is coming up. And I went into a lot more detail in last week's training, so definitely go back and see that one. But for this week, we're going to talk about, again, the role of self-justification in marriages, how it shows up, the science behind it, and then how do we overcome it? How do we get beyond this and actually heal and strengthen our marriage, even though we know that our brain is causing this symbiotic dysfunction with our partner and we keep falling into it. We don't know how to get out of it. Before I just jump into things, if you guys don't know me, my name is Joel Evan. I'm a best-selling author. I was a former first responder for 15 years, and I've been with my wife for 15 years. And for 10 of those years, I had a ton of problems. We were on the brink of divorce. And my wife asked me, she said, Joel, you got to fix these issues with you. And I didn't believe that I had anything to work on, but I took her advice, luckily. And I gave it one more try, guys. I gave it one more shot at, can I fix this? And I didn't think I could. I didn't think I could change. I didn't think she could change with the kids, but it happened rapidly. And within 3 months, our marriage changed for the better. My relationship with my kids strengthened. All the fights, all the bickering, all the problems we had went away. And I realized after going through this process, which then compounded, I just kept doing what I was doing for years. And I realized there was a system, there was a framework that I could actually teach to other men and actually other couples. And so that's what I'm doing now. If you guys are interested in learning more about some of my coaching and what I do, feel free to drop me a line and I'll get you the details. All right, let's jump in to this idea behind bias and self-justification, why our brain does this. I love this stuff. If you guys know me, I talk a lot about the brain, which I think makes me a little bit different. There's a lot of guys out there talking about how you need to lose lots of weight and then you'll be a man of worth. And that's true. But I don't hear anybody talking about the brain. I hear a lot of other guys just saying how you need to pray more and you need to be connected to God and that's going to fix your marriage. And although I don't disagree about having a spiritual sense, I don't know. I see a lot of those guys still not getting results. So I don't know if that's the answer, but no one's talking about how we are hardwired, the software that is running on our systems. And when you understand the brain and certain brain patterns, you'll understand why you keep self-sabotaging yourself. So I think it's really, really important. It shows up in relationships. I know for me, the more I geek out on this stuff, the better compassionate leader I am. And the more, human I can be and more present I can be in my family and show up. So here's the deal. A lot of differences cause rifts in our relationships. But here's the thing. Once there's a rift, the couple explains it as being this inevitable result of all their differences. And so happy couples, they actually know how to manage their conflicts. Unhappy couples, they just get pulled farther apart by these angry confrontations. They typically will retreat to some of their familiar positions. They brood, they just stop listening to each other. And if they do actually listen, they're not hearing each other. The attitude is, yeah, I know how you feel about this. I'm not going to change because I'm right. The question is, what if you just tried to anticipate the other person's needs? Like for once. What if you just tried to get ahead of the curve? What if you took a proactive approach? What if you anticipated your wife's needs? You know that the things that you're doing are pissing your wife off, but you don't want to get ahead of it. You don't want to anticipate it. You don't want to plan. You don't want to address. Because part of you, I think, thinks, oh my God, if I do this, that means I'm going to be killing who I am. And because I feel like if I were to do that, then I would be destroying a part of me. That's not me. That's not who I am. And so we just end up having a terrible marriage. We have the choice not to. I see in organizations, leaders that have mission statements, right? They plan an attack. If it's for an entrepreneur, if they're a CEO, they plan ahead. They have contingency plans. The military does this, but yet we don't want to plan for contingencies of what might happen in our marriage because we're just too ego and big-headed about it, saying, oh, no, that could never do that because that would change who I am. I don't know about you, but when it comes to this game, you can have that ego. I could care less. And the question I would ask you is, why are you too good to plan? What makes you so special? I'll be honest, I'm just so over the bullshit, guys, that for me, I can just let that go. I'm not perfect all the time, but because my stance is I'm standing for unity. And so unity doesn't always mean I need to be right. The problem is self-justification is going to ruin your marriage. And here's the kind that will especially erode a marriage, and it reflects a more serious effort to protect not what we did, but who we are. And it comes in two versions. I'm right and you're wrong. And even if I'm wrong, too bad, because that's just the way I am. And they're not saying I'm right and you're wrong about a certain memory. They're saying I'm the right kind of person. You're the wrong kind of person. And because you're the wrong kind of person, you can't appreciate my virtues. You even think that some of my virtues are flaws. Every marriage is a story. And so, like all stories, it's subject to a participant's distorted perceptions and memories that preserve the narrative as each side sees it. So take a couple, let's say Frank and Deborah. They're at a crucial decision point between, I love this person, but this person drives me crazy. Self-justification is blocking each partner from asking, could I be wrong? Could I be making a mistake? Could I change? And so we create these implicit theories that then create confirmation bias that then create our reality. And so when we explain our own behavior, self-justification just allows us to flatter ourselves. We give ourselves credit for all of our good actions, but let the situation and excuse the bad ones. When we do something that hurts another one, for example, we rarely say, oh, I behave this way because I'm just cruel and heartless. Instead, we say, I was provoked. Anyone would have done what I did. I had no choice. Yeah, okay, yeah, I did it. It wasn't me. I was drunk. Yeah, think about it. When we do something generous or helpful or brave, we don't say that I did it because I was provoked or drunk, I had no choice, or because the guy on the phone guilt-induced me to donating to charity. We did it because we're generous. We're open-hearted. And successful partners, they extend each other the same self-forgiving ways of thinking that we extend to ourselves. They forgive each other's missteps as being just due to the situation, but they give each other credit for the thoughtful and loving things that they do. Happy couples give each other the benefit of the doubt. Unhappy ones don't. And so if a couple is arguing from the premise that each is a good person who did something wrong but fixable, or they did something blunderheaded because of some momentary situational pressures, there's hope for correction and compromise. But unhappy couples, they invert this. Self-justification causes them to blame each other on personality flaws, but excuse their own unwillingness to change on the basis of their personality virtues. I can't help it. It's just natural for me to raise my voice when I'm angry. That's just the way I am. I bet you they don't raise their voice to a police officer or to an employer or to a 300-pound irritating stranger on the street. That's just the way you are. You're just like your mother. How many people have heard that? Well, I don't think your wife's talking about the way your mother bakes or the way she dances tango. You're being criticized for who you are rather than what you did. And this evokes a deep sense of shame and helplessness, and it makes the other person want to hide and disappear. And that creates contempt. And contempt is, I don't value the who that you are. Self-justification is the prime suspect in murder of a marriage, guys. And each partner resolves the dissonance caused by the conflict and the irritation by explaining the spouse's behavior in a certain particular way. Then this explanation sets them down a path, down a pyramid. And then those who travel the route of shame and blame will eventually be rewriting the story of the marriage. And as they do this, they seek further evidence from their friends and others to justify their growing pessimistic or contemptuous views of each other. They start to shift from minimizing negative aspects of the marriage to overemphasizing them, seeking every little bit of support, every little bit of evidence to fit their new story, their new paradigm. And as the new story takes shape with the husband and wife, they're rehearsing it privately or even with friends, like I mentioned, and they become blind to each other's good qualities, the very ones that initially caused them to fall in love. And the tipping point at which a couple starts rewriting their love story, this is something that John Gottman said. He's one of the number one resources and experts in relationships. He said that when the magic ratio dips below 5-1 positive interactions to negative ones, that's when he sees the love story cripple. Because happy couples, they saw their challenges as rough spots, nothing more than that. And the reason they do is that once a couple starts reducing dissonance by taking the ego-preserving route of vilifying their former partner, they need to keep justifying their position. So guys, here's a key point. Use empathy to overcome self-justification. In good marriages, a confrontation, a difference of an opinion, clashing habits, even some of your angry fights, they can bring the couple closer by helping each partner learn something new, by forcing them to examine their own assumptions about their abilities, about their limitations. And it's not easy to do. Letting go of the self-justification that cover up our mistakes, that protects our desires to do things just the way we want to, and that minimizes the hurt that we inflict on others that we love, it can be embarrassing. It can be painful. Without self-justification, we might be left standing emotionally naked or unprotected in a pool of regrets and losses. And yet, in this final analysis, we believe it's worth it, because no matter how painful it can be to let go of self-justification, the result teaches us something deeply important about ourselves, and it can bring peace and insight and self-acceptance. The pain it felt is always more intense than the pain inflicted. Even the actual moment of pain is identical. There's an old joke, right, that other guy's broken leg is trivial, but our broken fingernail is serious. And it turns out it can actually be more accurate based on neurological wiring. And so I'm going to tell you about an experiment with an English neurologist who paired people up in a tit-for-tat experiment. So each participant was hooked up to a mechanism that exerted pressure on their index fingers. And each participant's finger, they were instructed to apply the same amount of force that their partner's finger that they had just felt. And guess what they found? They found that they could not do it fairly, even though they tried as hard as they could to do so. Every time one partner felt the pressure, he retained with considerably greater force, thinking he was giving what he had gotten. And so what the researchers concluded, that the escalation of pain is a natural byproduct of neural processing. And it helps explains why two boys, when they start out exchanging punches on the arm as a game to find out who can take the hardest punch, they say, they think to themselves, oh yeah, I'm punching you equal amounts. It always ends up in a fist fight. Why? Because they feel like the other person got the best of them. And that is why two nations will find themselves in a spiral of retaliation. I talked about this last week in the training as well, when we were talking about some of the experiments, that a lot of people would rather, they talked about getting a fair deal, right? And they talked about giving people money. But if one person felt the deal was unfair, they would rather get no money at all. So they would actually even get no money because they felt like the deal was unfair. So think about how many times you come back into that in your relationship where you just think something's not fair. It's the perception of it not being fair, to the point where, and we see this in divorces especially, where people are willing to go to blows to make the other person hurt and suffer because they feel like they're being treated unfairly. Let's talk a little bit about the science behind perpetrators and victims. I think this is really critical. And especially in the time right now, we're hearing a lot about narcissism. Everybody's a narcissist. And I don't think that's true. I think there's actually some neurological wiring in our brains that just make it impossible for us to see some of the things we're doing. Now, when they were evaluating perpetrators, they found that 2/3 of perpetrators claimed external or mitigating circumstances for what they did. So if they did something, they would say, well, I was just abused as a child, or I've been under a lot of stress lately. And here's the three things that you'll see someone, a perpetrator or someone, do when they make mistakes. So here's the three things people will often do when they make a mistake. Number one is they're going to deny they did it. Two, they try to minimize it. And three, they just try to get rid of the episode as fast as possible, like it didn't even happen. Now, one reason a perpetrator can't understand a victim is they can't actually admit that they are preoccupied with justifying what they did. But another reason is that they really don't know how the victim feels. We talked about that earlier, bringing empathy into your relationship. And that's why a lot of times you'll see couples that are married for 18 years, and then at breakfast, out of nowhere, the wife says, I want a divorce. And it's because she's been holding on to this for such a long time. Another interesting thing that we see is that individuals with higher self-esteem, they have a greater denigration for their victims. So if they really think highly of themselves, they think even less of a bad thing of what they're doing to their victim, which again, I think comes in this narcissistic way. I don't think people are actually, I think there's very few narcissists, but it just comes off in this way because maybe you have an individual or a man in this case who are usually being called narcissists. They have this higher self-esteem about who themselves, and so therefore they have a stronger bias. And they also, the studies show, they just think less of their victim. And how could they? Because they're always right? And if you look back at the Stanley Milgram experiment, where this is a famous experiment where he actually tested shocking individuals, and he had people come in and he said, hey, I want you to shock the individual every time they get the wrong answer or every time they do something wrong. And what he found is that the subjects would continue to electrocute the people, even though they were saying on the other end, "Stop electrocuting me, I'm dying." They weren't truthfully being electrocuted, but they were making sounds and saying, "I stop it, you're hurting me, I'm dying." And the electrocutors, they found, the people that were giving the shock, they didn't stop. And they were like, "Please, you stop doing what you're doing. But I was told by another person of authority, I need to do this. And so I'm just carrying out these actions." And so what we found also from that experiment is that many subjects will harshly devalue the victim as a consequence of just acting against them. Like they didn't follow the rules. He was stupid and stubborn. He deserved to get shocked. That was a common response for them justifying what they did. They didn't want to admit this horror, but they had to figure out a way because they, as a person, they can't be bad. So what can I possibly have in common with perpetrators or murderers or torturers? It's much more reassuring to believe that they're evil and I'm not. And so we don't want to look at humanity. We don't want to look through that door because it might actually force us to face the haunting truth of that famous Pogo's great line, which is, "We have met the enemy and he is us." All right, I want to wrap this training up with just briefly on how we can let go. How can we own up in our marriages, in our relationships, and get over this self-justification hump? Number one is asking ourselves, why don't we admit mistakes? And I think the first thing to look at is we aren't even aware of what we need to do because self-justification is just purring along automatically and it's beneath the subconscious. So protecting us from this dissonant realization that we did anything wrong. Mistake? What mistake? I didn't make a mistake. The tree jumped in front of my car. What do I have to be sorry about anyway? She started it. She stole it. It's not my fault. Secondly, America is a mistake-phobic culture, one that links mistakes with incompetence and stupidity. So even when people are aware of having made a mistake, they're often reluctant to admit it, even to themselves, because they take it as evidence that they are a blithering idiot. And so if we really want people to take responsibility for their mistakes and then strive to correct them, we have to overcome these impediments. And most Americans know they're supposed to say, "Oh yeah, we learn from our mistakes," but deep down, none of them mean it. They think that mistakes mean you're stupid. And so combined with the culture's famous amnesia for anything that has happened or gone wrong more than even a month ago, this attitude means that people are going to treat other people that make mistakes as hot potatoes, eager to get rid of them as fast as possible, even if they have to toss them to someone else's lap. And there was a great study done about America and their mistakes in the 1970s. The psychologists Harold Stevenson and James Stigler, they became interested in the math gap performance between Asian and American school children. And by the fifth grade, the lowest scoring Japanese classroom was outperforming the highest scoring American classroom. So they spent a decade trying to figure this out. And they watched a Japanese boy struggle with the assignment of drawing cubes in 3 dimensions on a blackboard. The boy kept at it for 45 minutes, making mistakes. And Stevenson and Siegler, they even became anxious and embarrassed for him. But yet the boy himself was utterly unconscious of what was happening. He was not self-conscious about anything compared to the American observers. And he wondered why they felt worse than he did. Because our culture exacts a great cost psychologically for making a mistake, Stigler recalled. Whereas in Japan, it doesn't seem to be that way. So in Japan, mistakes or errors or confusions, they're all just a natural part of the learning process. And the boy eventually mastered the problem and his classmates cheered him on. And we don't do that. And the researchers found that American parents, the teachers, the children, they were all far more likely than the Japanese and Chinese counterparts to believe that mathematical ability is innate. If you have it, you don't have to work hard. And if you don't have it, well, then there's no point in trying. In contrast, most Asians regard math success like achievement in any other domain as a matter of persistence and plain hard work. Of course, you will make mistakes as you go along, but that's just how you learn and improve. It doesn't mean you're stupid. And they also worry that making mistakes means something about their inherent inability. And it ties into one of Carol Dweck's great work on mindset, that we need to praise effort, not the outcome. That's key for raising kids. And the last thing I'll leave you with this great quote, which is, "A great nation is like a great man. When he makes a mistake, he realizes it. Having realized it, he admits it. Having admitted it, he corrects it. He considers those who point out his faults as his most benevolent teachers." Guys, have an amazing rest of your week. I hope you found this training impactful as I did. I hope it changes your lives. I am sorry that it went 20 minutes instead of the usual 15, but sometimes these things go that way, and I promise the next one will be a little bit shorter. Next week, I'm looking at getting into cell phones and addictions and how we can become more present as fathers, as leaders in our home. Have an amazing week. If you want to reach out and you want to learn more about my coaching, please never hesitate. Feel free to reach out.